The story has talks of attempted suicide, so if you are triggered by that, please skip to the next story. The Risperidone wasn't taken as an attempt to get high or trip. It was primarily taken as a suicide attempt, and the medication was part of my prescription for suspected bipolar disorder and paranoia. Fortunately, unfortunately, it failed, and the experience was horrific. Wednesday. After I drank all the vodka, I sat outside under a tree and decided to swallow all of the pills I'd brought with me. At that time, although having been drunk, I had a reasonable level of coordination, and my memory up to that point is fine. 25 minutes in, things begin to go wrong. At first, I decided to lie down and let the drugs take hold with the firm idea that I'd simply slip out of consciousness and die. However, my heart began beating so hard it actually knocked some sense into me. My head was pounding, and the feeling is difficult to describe. It was like depression, but different in some way. It wasn't a sadness, but a complete removal of thought and emotion, like the soul had been torn out. I began losing conscious control, and for some reason had got up and was walking towards home. Memory goes blank for the entire journey home, which is about 1 to 2 miles on foot. An hour and a half in. My whole body is struggling to stay conscious. I keep falling over and collapsing at the knees. It feels like I'm literally fighting an anesthetic or sedative, not an antipsychotic. If seen from the outside, I probably would have looked like I was drunk, but in pain. It felt as if my body was being crushed and weighed down. Again, there's the dark soulless feeling all over. My body ached and I went to the toilet as if I wanted to vomit, but didn't. It was almost like an instinctive reaction to feel better in some way, and maybe vomiting was the answer. When I went back to my room, I passed out and collapsed to the floor, banging my head badly on the drawers next to my bed. There was a bad cut and blood, but I was later to find no fracture. I crawl into my bed and pass out. 8 hours and 30 minutes in. I wake feeling more horrendous than I've ever felt in all my life. I can't do it justice how bad I felt. What was an empty feeling before now became an intense and very real depression, dark, evil, and compressed. The room seemed bright, yet dark. My body ached. There was a lot of confusion. Voices phased in and out as I heard my housemate in the next room packing to go home. I was trying to get up to go for help, but couldn't move. My heart rate and blood pressure were so high it seemed to paralyze me. The hammering in my throat, lungs, heart, and head was unbearable. My throat was so dry it felt as if I was going to suffocate, but I couldn't move to get the water from my side. A further 16 hours of this experience with little change in the symptoms, wishing to pass out but unable due to the intensity of the feelings. Thursday, paramedic called. I was finally able to get out of bed, but movement was immensely difficult. However, the mind had returned to a state of deadness. I went to the toilet and finally decided to call my mom and tell her what happened. She called the emergency services. I didn't want the remaining housemates to know I had attempted this, so I crawled downstairs and lay outside on the front path. I was taken to the hospital immediately because my heart rate and blood pressure were dangerously high. In the hospital, a strange symptom began to occur. An all-over body spasm that completely locked me up into a horribly contorted shape on the hospital trolley. The doctor seemed to take an age before treating it, as I was obviously in intense pain and was crying heavily. Those cries were without tears as I was still dry. My back feels as if it's about to snap, and my arms are screwed up and I was completely unable to move. I probably look like someone with a serious brain disorder. Eventually I am given a sedative, which doesn't work. They then give me another 2 shots, and after about 10 minutes I begin to relax. The aftermath. It put me through hell and back. I would never, ever wish this on my worst enemy. The experience has left a significant emotional scar and also a physical shock feeling in the nerves through my back and shoulders. The soulless, dark feeling was horrendous. It was the closest thing to real death I have ever experienced, a lack of life. I feel bad just typing this. let me begin by stating that today is the worst day of my entire life. I consider myself to be an avid smoker and products of the marijuana variety. The mix of Seroquel and marijuana happened to come together by accident. I have problems with anxiety, and I happened to tell my parents about this, who later gave me Seroquel. I didn't think at any point that mixing these two would cause anything serious. Suffice it to say, I was wrong. I took the Seroquel around 2 p.m. and began to feel exhausted. By 6 p.m. I was asleep. By chance, my roommate and I happened to be both awake at 4:15 a.m., so of course we decided to partake in the festivities of 420. We smoked 2 bowls, and then I felt tired once again and decided it might be a good idea to sleep. I went to my room and had the funniest sensation that I couldn't understand. I had no idea what was going on with anything. It's not that I had no idea where I was or who I was, it's that I was completely unaware of any of it. I sat in front of this very computer and had a bitter taste in my mouth come on rather suddenly and an onset of confusion. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor having a seizure. I managed to cut my face, minimally, thank God, and cause minor trauma to my back. I can only remember little bits of the seizure, and my roommate had said it lasted well over 5 minutes. To sum up the medical side of things, my blood work revealed I have a great nutrition. I also have no family history of seizures. I reiterate, this has been single-handedly the worst day of my life, and I have no intention of repeating it. According to the doctor, I should wait a minimum of 3 weeks before I smoke anything, and I may have a seizure again at any time without warning until the Seroquel is completely out of my system. Given this information, I can't see how anybody would want to mix these two. My experience with Haldol was the worst drug experience of my life. A friend of mine, Joe, had been sick for a few days and was given several tabs of Haldol by a mutual friend. The mutual friend said that Haldol was an opiate painkiller, so my friend, being the happy pill popper he was, took 2 the first day. He said he felt relaxed and passed out. The next day was when his body aches returned. He took 3 and went back to sleep. On the 3rd day when I found him, he was complaining of massive body aches and asked me to hand him some of the Haldol from his desk. I was pleasantly intoxicated on alcohol and asked if he minded if I popped a few. He said yes, so I took 4. My previous experiences with pill popping had led me to believe that I needed quite a few to feel any major effects. Over the next hour and a half, I began to feel drowsy and had acquired a decent body high, which could be compared to Percocet. I even began to itch, which led me to believe it really was an opiate. I passed out after about 2 hours and woke up about 12 hours later. Feeling a bit hungover and a little shaky, I went down to Joe's room to smoke some bud and see how he was doing. He was in horrible pain and was clinched up on his bed in the fetal position. I smoked some pot with him and then sat down to watch TV. I was feeling better and got hungry, so I ate some chocolate cake that was in his fridge. This is when my whole life changed. About 3 bites into the chocolate cake, my tongue began pushing against the back of my teeth, almost like I had bad cotton mouth. I would pull it back and it would slowly edge forward until it was pressing against my teeth. Feeling a bit strange, I went to my room to lay down. This is approximately 24 hours since I had taken the Haldol. Upon arriving in my room, I was unable to sleep because of the involuntary movements of my tongue. I drank some water and tried to relax, but it was getting worse. Now my tongue was pushing past my teeth and protruding from my mouth. I would have to forcibly pull it back in and lock my jaw down. Then I began to get a little bit scared. I decided to try to completely relax and maybe I could go to sleep with my tongue stuck out. My tongue continued to push out until it stretched to the point it was painful. I began to panic and forced it back in and clenched my jaw shut. After clenching my jaw for about 10 minutes, my neck began to slowly bend to the right. Much like my tongue, I was unable to stop its movement or hold my head up straight any longer than a few seconds. Now I'm in my room by myself. My tongue is stuck all the way out, my head is crushed into my shoulder, and I am crying because it feels like I'm about to break my own neck from the force of the muscles clenching. This lasted for 4 hours. I had the most horrifying thoughts going through my head, thoughts of being stuck like this forever, and paranoia of my roommate coming home with his girlfriend and having to explain. Finally, I fell asleep. Upon awaking the next morning, I felt fine. I jumped up and probably did a little jig around the room. The happiest moment of my life was to be convulsion-free. 8 hours later, 48 hours from the initial dose, it came back, just as bad as before. I lost it. For the first time in my life, I wanted to die. I sent my buddy to the store for liquor and sleeping pills. I was either going to go to sleep or I was going to die trying. Upon his return, I consumed the fifth of liquor and 12 sleeping pills. Nothing. I took the remaining 12 sleeping pills and 2 pills of X I had purchased for the weekend. I was willing to try anything now. An hour later, I finally drifted off to sleep. I've spent the last 4 months of my life scared that they will come back. Joe's experience was 10 times worse. He had been on Haldol for 3 days and his whole body locked up for 2 days. Looking at the Haldol website says, will cause Parkinson's-like symptoms. That was no lie. Haldol is evil and is not meant to be abused. Please, do not try it. Once again, the story has to deal with suicide, so if you are triggered by that, please end the video. Thank you. Olanzapine has no ascertainable benefits in terms of recreation. That's not really what I was shooting for. Actually, I attempted suicide by consuming somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 milligrams, possibly a bit more. Now that I understand this drug better, I know it wasn't nearly enough to kill me. After consuming the medication, I felt overcome with dizziness and exhaustion shortly after, possibly within the hour preceding the overdose. Peak concentrations are typically reached within 6 hours. I fell asleep before then and awoke about 2 days later. Extremely dizzy and confused, my legs felt like lead for several days after I woke. No one noticed what had happened. I did not go to the hospital. As I started to move around in the next few hours, I experienced a strong metallic taste, dry mouth, difficulty urinating, constipation, and tremors. These are all consistent with side effects of the drug and therapeutic doses, though of a much more severe intensity. I have heard of a few cases of deaths related to Olanzapine overdose. Eli Lilly and Company has received reports of fatality in association with overdose of Olanzapine alone. In one case of death, the amount of acutely ingested Olanzapine was reported to be possibly as low as 450 milligrams. However, in another case, a patient was reported to survive an acute Olanzapine ingestion of 1,500 milligrams. This was from rxlist.com. Not really sure of what else those people had taken at the time, or of their body weight. It's still useful to know. In conclusion, trying to kill myself was in no way glamorous or fun. It was a very stupid thing to do. In hindsight, I don't believe I took enough Olanzapine to seriously harm myself permanently, though my liver and kidneys surely took a beating. I have fully recovered today, 1 year later. I do not recommend taking this drug unless it is medically necessary.